There's a version of you that wakes up tomorrow and never gets to choose again, because today you finally chose. Sit with that for a second. Somewhere out there right now, a person just like you is standing at the exact same fork in the road. One path leads to a life that shrinks a little more every single day, quiet, comfortable, and quietly dying. And the other path leads somewhere so much bigger that the person standing there right now can barely even imagine it. And here's the terrifying part. Most people never even realize they're standing at that fork. They think the choice has already been made for them. They think their mood, their outlook, their whole tone for how they experience being alive was handed to them by their childhood, their bank account, their bad luck, their ex, their boss, their government, their genetics. They think positivity is a personality trait like eye color, something you either got or you didn't. And that lie, that one single lie, has quietly murdered more dreams than poverty ever has. Because I need you to hear this clearly before we go one more sentence further. The most important decision you will ever make in your entire life is not your career, it's not your marriage, it's not even your health. It's whether or not you are fully, completely, unshakably committed to being happy no matter what gets thrown at you. And something is coming for you. I don't know what it is yet, and neither do you, but it's coming. Life does not ask permission before it throws a curveball at your chest. It doesn't check your calendar. It doesn't wait until you feel ready. It just came. And when it comes, there is only one gift on planet Earth that will actually save you in that moment. And it's not money in the bank, and it's not who you know, and it's not even how smart you are. It is a decision you make long before the storm ever shows up on the horizon. So let me tell you exactly where we're going in the next few minutes, because I want you to lock in for every second of it. We're going to rip apart the biggest myth about positivity that's keeping you stuck. The idea that it's some soft, fluffy, rose-colored nonsense for people who don't understand how hard the world really is. We're going to talk about why the exact same world can look like a graveyard to one person and a golden opportunity to another, standing in the same room, breathing the same air. We're going to talk about the quiet war that happens inside your own skull every single morning before your feet even touch the floor, and why winning that war determines everything else that happens to you that day. We're going to talk about fear. Real fear, the kind that's been sitting on your chest for years, and a strange, almost unreasonable way to make it disappear. And by the time we're done, you are going to understand something that separates the people who transform their entire existence from the people who stay exactly where they are for the next 20 years. Doing the same thing, complaining about the same thing, watching the same shows, making the same excuses, until one day they look in the mirror and don't recognize the tired stranger looking back. That is not going to be you. Not after today. Not if you actually let this sink into your bones instead of just your ears. Because here's the truth nobody wants to say out loud. You already know how to be miserable. You've been practicing it for years. You know exactly which channel to turn to, which relative to call, which old memory to replay, which mirror to stand in front of to feel like garbage in under 60 seconds. You are a master at finding evidence for how unfair everything is. And I'm not mocking you for that. I'm telling you that skill you built by accident, that exact same skill, works in reverse. You find whatever you go looking for. That's not a metaphor. That's not a motivational poster. That is a law as real as gravity. Want to feel like the world is ending? Turn on the news. Scroll for 10 more minutes. Call the one person who always agrees with your worst thoughts about yourself. It's there. It is unlimited. It will never run dry. But do you want to feel unstoppable? Want to feel like you were built for exactly this moment in history? That's there too. It is sitting right next to the misery on the same shelf, completely free, waiting for you to reach for it instead. Nobody is stopping you from grabbing it except the version of you that got comfortable complaining. And let's be honest about something, because I refuse to sell you a lie dressed up as motivation. This is not about pretending everything is fine when it isn't. This is not about slapping a fake smile over real pain and calling it healing. I am not telling you to lie to yourself. Toxic positivity is its own kind of prison. It's the version where you're not allowed to grieve, not allowed to be furious, not allowed to admit the floor just fell out from under you. That's not what we're building here. What we're building is something sturdier than that. It's the decision that no matter how dark the day gets, you are still the one who decides what you go looking for once the dust settles. You can acknowledge the storm without moving into it and building a house there. You can say, this is genuinely terrible, and still in the very same breath, go looking for one true thing that's still standing. That's not a denial, that's discipline. And discipline, real discipline, is always uncomfortable before it becomes powerful. Let me take you somewhere for a second. Picture the actual worst day of your life so far, the day everything came apart at once. Maybe you lost your job. Maybe the relationship ended in a way that gutted you. Maybe money disappeared faster than you could track it, and you sat in your car in a parking lot somewhere, not ready to walk inside and face anyone. I've been there. I've slept somewhere I never imagined I'd sleep. I've watched a parent not show up when showing up was the one thing a kid actually needed. I know what it is to have every single external circumstance scream that you are finished. And here's what I learned in the wreckage of all of that, something that took me years to actually believe instead of just repeating. Your life can be genuinely amazing, even on the day it looks the most destroyed. Not because the destruction isn't real, it's real, but because you are so much more than the worst thing currently happening to you. The moment you forget that you start living entirely inside the wreckage and you stop noticing that you are still breathing, still capable, still one decision away from a completely different trajectory. Here's the part that stings a little, so brace for it. Most people put more raw energy into their negativity than they ever put into their positivity. Think about how skillfully you can build a case against yourself. You can list every reason you fail before breakfast. You can recall every rejection with cinematic detail, down to the exact words that were used against you. You could write a thesis on why this won't work, why you're not built for it, why people like you don't get to have that. Meanwhile, when something good happens, you barely acknowledge it. A quick nod, and you move on, half convinced it was luck or a fluke or about to be taken away. You have been unconsciously training yourself day after day to become a world-class expert in your own disappointment. And I'm telling you right now, that same relentless energy redirected could make you a world-class expert in your own possibilities. It's the same muscle. You've just been using it against yourself. And your body does not know the difference between a thought and a threat. This is not some spiritual idea. This is how you are wired. When you marinate in negative thinking, your body responds as if the negativity is a physical event happening to you right now. Your shoulders tighten, your breathing shortens, your decisions get smaller and more defensive, and from that state, you go make small, scared, defensive choices that create more evidence for the very story you were telling yourself. It becomes a loop that feeds itself. I know how to talk negatively. Everyone does. It's easy. It requires no skill and no courage, but it doesn't work. It has never worked. It has never once talked to anyone into a better life. Meanwhile, when you speak with intention, when you choose words that build instead of words that bury, something shifts in the body first before it even shifts in the circumstances. You start speaking about things that are not yet true as though they are already becoming true. Not because you're lying to yourself, but because you understand something most people never grasp. You can call things into being with the tone you take toward your own future. Now here's where this gets uncomfortable, because this is where most people quietly check out of a message like this one. The part where it stops being about attitude and starts being about action. Because positivity that never leaves your head is just decoration. It has to walk. It has to get out of bed. Let me ask you something, and answer honestly, not to me, to yourself. You know exactly when you're wasting time. You know it when you're lying in bed at 7 in the morning scrolling through something meaningless, telling yourself you'll start in 5 more minutes. You know it. Nobody has to tell you. That awareness, the quiet, guilty voice, is not your enemy. It's the information. And the only way you ever break the cycle of laziness dressed up as rest is by starting the cycle of discipline the exact same way you'd start any habit, by simply doing the uncomfortable version once on purpose before you feel ready. Because here's a phrase you need to tattoo somewhere in your mind. Success is not convenient. It was never going to be convenient. It doesn't rearrange itself around your schedule, your mood, or your excuses. You have to rearrange yourself around what success actually requires. That means holding a line even when nobody's watching, maintaining a standard even when cutting a corner would feel so much easier, giving yourself no slack. Not because you're trying to punish yourself, but because slack, once you allow it, has a way of quietly becoming the new standard. And opportunities are going to keep showing up in your life, dressed up as distractions, dressed up as other people's urgent requests, dressed up as things that feel important in the moment. And every single time, you're going to have to ask yourself one blunt question: what do I actually want? Because if you don't know the answer to that, nothing else in this entire message matters. You'll just keep drifting toward whatever's loudest in the room. Ask yourself right now, honestly, how you're about to use the next several hours of your life. Is it moving you somewhere? Is it purposeful? Or is it just noise to fill the silence? Because when you actually know what you want, the whole equation changes. People ask the ones who wake up before the sun, why on earth would you do that to yourself? And the answer is always the same, stripped of any bravado: because I know what I want, and I refuse to let sleep be the reason I don't get it. Discipline doesn't make you feel like a hero every single morning. Most days it feels like nothing at all. It just quietly gets things done. And when things actually get done day after day, that's when you start accumulating something people call success. But really, it's just the compound interest of 1,000 small decisions nobody else ever saw you make. And I need you to take something from me right now, even if it stings, because sometimes love sounds honest instead of comfort. If you are not where you want to be yet, some of that is circumstance. But some of it, if you're honest, is the snooze button. It's an extra 20 minutes. It's the version of you that would rather make an excuse than make an adjustment. I'm not saying that to shame you. I'm saying it because the moment you stop blaming the outside world for every piece of your stagnation, you get your power back. Because you cannot fix what other people did to you. You cannot fix the family you were born into, or the door that didn't open, or the break that didn't come. But you can fix the time you wake up. You can fix what you feed your mind in the first 60 minutes of the day. You can fix whether you show up to your own life like it matters or like it's just something happening to you. You are not going to feel amazing every single day. Let go of that fantasy right now, because it is quietly wrecking people who chase it. If discipline only showed up on the days you felt inspired, discipline would be worthless, because inspiration is unreliable by nature. It comes and goes like weather. The people who actually build something remarkable are not the ones who feel like it every morning. They are the ones who showed up anyway, dragging a body that didn't want to move, dragging a mind that was making 100 excuses, and doing the thing regardless. That's not a small detail. That is basically the entire game. Almost all of what separates an extraordinary life from an average one is simply showing up on the days it would have been so easy not to. So stop the story. Stop saying this person didn't help you, that person didn't show up for you, you didn't get the same starting line as everyone else. Maybe all of that's true. I believe you. But it changes nothing about what happens next, because what happens next was never in their hands to begin with. It was always yours. Look at yourself honestly without flinching. And finish this sentence. The real reason I haven't gotten to where I say I want to go is, and let the answer be true, even if it's ugly. Maybe it's comfortable. Maybe it's fear is dressed up as practical. Maybe it's simply that you've been spending your resources, your money, your hours, your attention on things that soothe you in the moment instead of things that build you for the long run. That's not a life sentence. That's just information. And once you can see it clearly, you can finally do something about it. Here's something almost nobody says clearly enough. Waking up early is not just a productivity trick. It's an act of self-respect. It's a way of saying, my life is worth more hours of consciousness, not fewer. While most of the noise of the world is still asleep, you get a stretch of silence that belongs entirely to you, uncontaminated by anyone else's demands, anyone else's chaos, anyone else's opinions. That silence is where you get to decide who you're becoming before the world gets a chance to decide it for you. And yes, it is going to feel unnatural at first. The first night you try to shift your schedule, you might barely sleep at all, and the next day will drag. Good, let it drag, because that exhaustion is exactly what gets you into bed earlier that night, instead of staying up scrolling through something that adds nothing to your life. The discomfort is doing the work for you if you let it. And once you actually claim those extra hours, ask yourself something honest. What are you doing with them? Because you might work at your job for 8 or 9 hours. Respect. You might commute, spend time with people you love, handle the responsibilities that come with being an adult in this world. Respect. Again, all of that. But there are still hours left over, and the question is, what fills them? Is it something building the future you claim you want? Or is it another show, another scroll, another version of numbing out from the very life you say you're trying to change? You don't have to answer that to me. You have to answer it to the version of yourself standing 5 years down the road, looking back at exactly this moment, wondering why you didn't use the time you actually had. Because here's the uncomfortable math nobody wants to say plainly. If you want an extraordinary life, the kind that looks like freedom, the kind lived entirely on your own terms, it does not come from an average number of hours invested with an average amount of intensity. It comes from paying a price that most people are simply unwilling to pay. And you also need something you cannot manufacture through effort alone. You need to find the thing you actually have some real capacity for, and then pour everything into developing it. Because effort without any raw material to work with just burns you out chasing something you were never wired for. Some of the most important self-awareness you will ever build is figuring out where your actual gift lives and then refusing to bury it under comfort. And through all of this, understand something clearly. The most important act, the one that sets the tone for absolutely everything downstream of it, is winning the morning. Not perfect, not glamorous, just winning it. Because how you open the first hour of consciousness tends to be how the rest of the day unfolds. It is not easy. Nobody promised you easy, but it is worth it in a way that's almost impossible to explain to someone who hasn't lived both versions of themselves, the one who let the morning slip away and the one who claimed it on purpose. Because so many years quietly slide by, and one day you look up and ask yourself what you've actually built, only to realize you've spent an entire chapter of your life performing someone else's script instead of writing your own. Don't do that for yourself. It is not sustainable. And deep down, you already know it. You are not here to become a smaller, quieter copy of somebody else's expectations. You are not here to measure your worth against a filtered image on a screen, or a headline in a magazine, or a stranger's carefully curated highlight reel. That comparison game has no finish line, and it was never designed to have one. It exists to keep you feeling slightly behind forever, so you keep consuming, keep chasing, keep doubting the very things that make you valuable in the first place. You already carry what you need, not in some distant future version of yourself, but right now, underdeveloped maybe, unpolished maybe, but present. Your job isn't to manufacture anything worth it. Your job is to develop what's already inside you instead of burying it under fear of what people might say. Because the moment you start stepping toward the things that scare you instead of away from them, something in you begins to wake up that's been asleep for years. You start moving toward your goals instead of orbiting them from a safe distance. And one day, you'll look back and feel something most people never get to feel. Genuine gratitude that you had the nerve to walk into the fear instead of building your whole life around avoiding it. Because there is nothing worse, nothing than reaching the end of a long life and realizing the only thing that stopped you was a fear of what other people might think. Their opinions were never going to pay your bills, raise your children, or lie awake with you at 3 a.m. So why did you let them write the ending of your story? The only question that actually matters is this: what do you want? Not what your family expects, not what looks impressive online. What do you, stripped of every outside voice, actually want your life to stand for? Because once your personal values and your daily direction start lining up, something shifts. You stop needing someone else's quote to get you out of bed. You start generating your own. You stop borrowing motivation and start producing it, because you're finally living a life that's pulling you forward instead of one you have to drag yourself through. And understand this too, because it will save you a lot of unnecessary heartbreak. The moment you start actually chasing what you want, some people around you are going to feel it as a threat, even the ones who love you. It rarely means they're trying to sabotage you. More often it means your movement is exposing their own stillness, and that's uncomfortable for them to sit with. That's not your responsibility to fix it. Your responsibility is to keep walking toward the fear instead of retreating from the discomfort it stirs up in other people. So here is where we start building the actual method, because a feeling without a method fades by Thursday. Take out something to write on right now and get honest about your top 3 fears. Not vague ones, specific ones. Rank them. Number 3 should be the one that scares you but feels almost survivable. Number 2, a little more intense. Number 1, the one you've been quietly avoiding for years. Maybe the one you haven't even said out loud to another human being. Start with number 3. Step into it deliberately, on purpose, and get through to the other side of it. Something strange happens once you do. Your self-trust rises without you even trying to force it. Confidence isn't something you talk yourself into. It's a byproduct of evidence. And stepping into fear number 3 just handed you real evidence. Now fear number 2 doesn't look quite impossible. You step into that one too, and by the time you circle back to fear number 1, you're not the same person who first wrote it down. You've built the nerve through repetition, not through some sudden burst of courage that fell out of the sky. Picture your life as 2 points with a gap between them, where you stand right now and the future you daydream about without even meaning to. The one that sits quietly in the back of your mind, no matter how hard the day gets. Between those 2 points sit a series of walls. Most of those walls are not made of steel or stone. They're made of other people's opinions, inherited limitations, and old stories about who you're allowed to become. And the very fears you just ranked and numbered, those are almost always hiding somewhere inside that gap. That's exactly why exercise matters so much. Push against one of those walls consistently, and it eventually gives way. The same way pressure applied long enough to any barrier eventually finds its breaking point. And once one wall falls, you're not the same person facing the next one. You're stronger, because you've already proven to yourself that walls fall when you refuse to stop pushing. That's how momentum compounds. Wall by wall, fear by fear, until what once looked blurry and impossible slowly comes into focus, close enough that you can almost reach out and touch it. Now the walls are falling. Now you can feel it. And this is exactly the moment where most people make their fatal mistake. They think the hard part is over. It isn't. It's just the beginning. Because breaking through a wall doesn't hand you the life you're after. It gives you access to the next battlefield. And what happens on that battlefield, that's not decided by inspiration anymore. Inspiration got you to the door. Now something else has to walk you through it night after night, when nobody's clapping, when nobody's watching, when the only witness to what you're building is the empty room and the clock. So let's talk about the grind. Not the version of the grind people post about with a caption and a filter. The real one is the one that happens at hours that don't have names yet, where the sun hasn't decided whether it's coming up or you've simply lost track of whether it went down. There is a version of building something that requires you to work until your eyes burn, until the coffee stopped helping 3 hours ago, until your body is quietly begging you to stop, and something underneath the exhaustion, something louder than the exhaustion, refuses. That's not a flex. That's not a bragging right. That's just what it costs. Nobody warned you that some nights you'll watch the sun rise through a window you haven't left in over 20 hours. Not because you were trying to prove something to anyone, but because the work simply wasn't finished. And stopping felt betrayal. If your mission is real, if it's actually big enough, this will happen to you too. And when it does, you won't recognize yourself as a martyr. You'll recognize it as Tuesday. Here's what almost nobody tells you about that kind of grind, though. It isn't fueled by willpower. Willpower runs out. Willpower is a muscle, and muscles fatigue. What actually carries a person through the 2 a.m. hours, through the 40th rejection, through the version of tired that sleep doesn't fix, is something underneath willpower. A mission so specific, so personal, so non-negotiable that stopping feels more painful than continuing. That's the difference between a goal and a mission. A goal politely asks for your effort. A mission demands it, the way oxygen demands to be breathed. When your reason is only about impressing somebody, it evaporates the first time it gets expensive. But when your reason is wired into who you decided to become, expense stops being a deterrent. It becomes the toll you already agreed to pay. So before we go any further into the mechanics of execution, you need a mission statement that can survive contact with exhaustion. Not a vague dream, not "I want to be successful," which means nothing and therefore motivates nothing. I mean something specific enough that it can act like a compass at 3 in the morning when your feelings have completely checked out and only your commitment is left standing. Write it down. Say it in the mirror until it stops sounding rehearsed and starts sounding true. Because on the nights ahead, feelings are going to lie to you constantly. They're going to tell you you're not built for this, that you should quit while you still have some dignity left, that everyone else got a head start you never had. Your mission doesn't care what your feelings think that day. It just keeps pointing forward the same direction every single time, regardless of the weather in your chest. Now let's talk about the actual mechanism that separates people who talk about discipline from people who live inside it. It's not a heroic burst of motivation, it's ownership of the first hour. You already know this. But knowing it and living inside it are two entirely different animals. Living inside it means the alarm goes off and there is no negotiation. Not a 5-minute negotiation. Not a just this once. The moment you allow negotiation with yourself in that sacred first hour, you've taught your own mind that your word is optional. And a mind that's been taught your word is optional will find 1,000 ways to talk you out of everything hard for the rest of your life. So this isn't really about waking up early. It's about proving to yourself in the smallest, quietest, most unglamorous moment of the day that when you say a thing, it happens. That single proof, repeated daily, becomes the foundation every other discipline in your life gets built on top of. And here's something you need to hear about momentum, because people expect it to arrive like a wave, and instead it arrives like a whisper. The first days of real discipline feel like nothing. You wake up early and the world doesn't applaud. You skip the distraction and nothing visibly changes. You put in the extra hour and it feels like it vanished into nothing. This is the exact point where most people quit, because they were expecting proof, and the universe hadn't sent any yet. Be okay with small. Be okay with momentum that's barely detectable at first, because that's how all momentum starts. It compounds in silence before it ever compounds in public. The weeks you can't see anything happening are not wasted weeks. They're the exact weeks that make the visible results possible later. Trust that even when the evidence refuses to show up on schedule, and you will have gloomy days, dark ones, on days where nothing about the plan feels like it's working and everything about your body wants to lie back down and disappear into the blanket. Expect them. Don't treat them as proof that something's wrong with you. Treat them as the toll booth on this particular road, the one every single person who's ever built anything worth building has had to pass through. There's a difference between hating the struggle and honoring it. Hating it drains you, turns every hard day into an insult, into evidence that life is against you. Honoring it does something completely different. It says, this is hard because it's supposed to be hard. This discomfort is doing something to me right now that comfort never could. And I would rather be forged by this than softened by the alternative. The exact same difficulty, viewed through two different lenses, either breaks a person or builds one. The difficulty itself never changes. Your relationship with it does not exist. Now here's where we go to war with something that lives inside every single person listening to this, whether they admit it out loud or not. The voice. The inner dialogue runs underneath everything, all day, uninvited. The one that starts talking the second you wake up and doesn't fully shut off even when you're trying to sleep. You cannot stop it from existing. Don't waste your energy trying to silence it completely, because it's not going anywhere, but you can absolutely stand inside yourself and tell it to sit down. There will be moments probably today, probably in the next hour, where that voice starts building its familiar case against you, the same tired argument it's made 1,000 times before, and you are going to have to look at it directly and say, not today, not this time. I've heard this argument before and I know exactly how it ends, and I'm not following you down that road again. This is not some soft self-help platitude. This is closer to combat. Because the voice inside your head is relentless, and it is patient, and it knows exactly which memories to bring up to make you feel smallest. It knows your worst day, and it will replay it in high definition whenever it thinks it can get away with it. Your job, the actual discipline underneath all the other discipline, is to catch it earlier and earlier each time, until eventually you're intercepting it before it even finishes its first sentence. That's not something you master in a week. That's something you get slightly better at every single day you choose to fight it instead of obeying it. And while you're fighting that internal battle, protect the external one just as fiercely. Be relentless, almost paranoid about what you let into your mind and who you let into your circle. Every piece of content you consume, every conversation you sit inside, every person you give your evenings to is quietly training your baseline. You are not the same person walking back through your own front door at night as you were when you left that morning. Something about the day changed you, either sharpened you or dulled you, made you more awake or numbered. That's happening whether you're paying attention to it or not. So, pay attention. Ask at the end of each day, did today's inputs build the version of me I'm trying to become, or did they quietly erode it? Most people never ask that question even once in their entire life. You're going to start asking about it daily. Let's talk about perspective now, because perspective is the lever that moves everything else. The exact same circumstance filtered through two different perspectives produces two completely different lives. One person loses everything and becomes bitter for a decade. Another person loses the exact same things and becomes the most grateful, most dangerous version of themselves within a year. The circumstance didn't decide the outcome. The lens did. And here's the part that should genuinely shake you. You get to choose the lens, not once. Every single morning, it's a decision that has to be remade daily, because yesterday's gratitude doesn't automatically carry over today. You wake up and the choice starts again from zero. This is where envy and comparison have to get cut out. Not softened, not managed, cut out, because they are actively poisoning the exact perspective you're trying to build. Every minute spent measuring your unfinished chapter against someone else's highlight reel is a minute stolen from building your own story. And here's the brutal truth about comparison. It never actually stops once you catch up to whoever you were comparing yourself to. There will always be someone further ahead, always another highlight reel, always another reason to feel behind, if you let the game keep being defined by other people's positions instead of your own progress. The only comparison that has any value at all is between who you were yesterday and who you're choosing to become today. Now, on to execution, because philosophy without execution is just an expensive way to feel inspired for an afternoon. Real execution requires you to stop waiting for the feeling of readiness, because that feeling is unreliable and often simply never arrives. The people who actually build extraordinary lives are not the ones who feel ready. They're the ones who moved while still afraid, while still unsure, while still carrying doubt in one hand and action in the other. Doubt doesn't have to disappear before you move. It just has to stop being the one who drives. And here's a principle that has never once failed anyone who actually applied it with their whole chest, not halfway, not as an experiment, but completely. Act as if it were impossible to fail. Not because failure can't happen. It can. Setbacks are guaranteed. But there's a difference between failing and being finished. And that difference is entirely up to you. If you remove the category unrecoverable from your own mind, something shifts immediately in how you move through the world. You stop hesitating at the exact moments hesitation costs you the most. You stop asking permission from people who were never going to give it to them. You start speaking, creating, building, moving with a certainty that most people simply don't carry, because most people are still negotiating with the fear of a collapse that statistically they will probably survive anyway. Because here's what fear actually is. When you strip away all the drama around it, fear is mostly anticipated. It's the story your mind talks about a future that hasn't happened yet, and it is almost always more brutal than whatever actually ends up happening. The dread beforehand is usually heavier than the event itself, which means the people who move through fear aren't the ones who stopped feeling it. They're the ones who stopped believing their predictions were accurate. They learned through repetition that the monster under the bed was mostly shadowed, and once they turned the light on enough times, the monster lost its power to keep them frozen. So say it to yourself out loud if you have to, until it stops sounding foreign coming out of your own mouth. I cannot fail. I can only learn. I cannot lose. I can only adjust. I cannot break. I can only bend and come back stronger than the version of me that went into the storm. This isn't an arrogance. Arrogance is loud and hollow and collapses the first time it meets real resistance. This is something quieter and far more dangerous to whatever's been standing in your way. Certainty, built one small proof at a time until it becomes the operating system you run on instead of the fear you used to run on. And certainty, real certainty, is magnetic in a way that's almost impossible to fake and almost impossible to hide once you actually have it. People feel it before you even explain yourself. Rooms shift when someone walks in who has actually stopped negotiating with their own fear. Doubt runs from that kind of presence, not because the doubtful person consciously decided to back off, but because certainty and hesitation cannot occupy the same space for very long. One eventually pushes the other out. Make sure it's yours that stays. But don't mistake any of this for a solo mission, because that's another trap waiting quietly on this road. No one has ever built something extraordinary entirely alone, no matter how the story gets told afterward. But here's the distinction that matters, the one that keeps people stuck for years. Nobody who ever built something remarkable waited around for permission or belief from other people before they started moving. You will have to believe before the room is believed. You will have to stand while people around you are still comfortably seated. You will have to speak your intentions out loud while some of the very people listening are quietly amused, or worse, quietly hoping you fail, so your ambition stops making their stillness look so obvious. That's not paranoia. That's simply what happens when you decide to move while the room around you has decided to stay still. You are going to have to lead a version of yourself into existence before you fully feel like that version yet. That's uncomfortable and slightly strange, claiming an identity you haven't fully grown into. But every single person who eventually became something extraordinary spent a season looking from the outside like they were pretending. They weren't pretending, they were under construction. There's a difference, even though from a distance the two can look identical. Now here's where the strategy tightens, because feelings and philosophy alone don't survive a real setback, and setbacks are coming guaranteed no matter how disciplined you are. The strategy is this: decide in advance how you're going to respond to failure before it actually happens, because in the moment, your judgment will be compromised by the sting of it. If you wait until the setback lands to figure out your response, you'll respond from panic instead of principle. But if you've already decided calmly in advance that a setback is data and not a verdict, then when it actually arrives, you already know exactly what to do with it. You adjust, you extract the lesson. You keep moving, slightly wiser and slightly more dangerous than you were the moment before it happened. And there is a very specific kind of person this message is not for. The person looking for the moment things get easy before they commit fully. Things are not going to get easier. You mature, you take on more responsibility, more people start depending on you, the stakes climb instead of shrinking. What actually changes is not the difficulty of the terrain, What changes is your capacity to carry more weight across it without buckling. That capacity is built exactly the way muscle is built, under load, under resistance, under conditions that would have broken the earlier version of you standing exactly where you're standing right now. So, here's the line in the sand, the one that determines whether everything you've absorbed so far becomes a permanent shift or just another motivational moment that fades by the weekend. Somewhere very close to the goal, most people quit. Not at the beginning, where quitting is almost expected, but right near the very edge of the breakthrough, 1 yard away from the exact thing they'd been grinding toward for months or years. They can't see how close they actually are because the exhaustion has clouded their depth perception, and so they let go of the rope at the precise moment holding on for one more pull would have changed everything. And that's exactly where we're headed next. What it actually looks like to stand at that final yard line, exhausted, doubting, with every reasonable voice in your head whispering that it's finally time to let go. And why the people who refuse to let go in that exact moment are the ones whose names end up meaning something.